Just a scratch. You call this just a scratch? The voice, shrill and dripping with contempt, tore through the elegant silence of the Riviera Resort's lobby. Everything seemed to pause. The gentle melody of the piano faltered, and a few guests sipping their tea turned their heads with curiosity. The speaker was Isabella Grant. She stood there, proud in her expensive silk dress, her eyes blazing with fire, fixed on a tiny spot on her brand-new Louis Vuitton suitcase. Across from her, the elderly woman in a housekeeper's uniform maintained a strange and unwavering composure. She bowed her head slightly, her voice soft but clear. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize. It must have been lightly scraped during transport." "Scraped?" Isabella scoffed, cutting her off. "Or was it due to the carelessness of people like you? Do you have any idea how many rooms you'd have to clean to afford this?" To assert her dominance, Isabella shoved the suitcase hard towards the employee. The designer luggage slid across the floor and collided with the woman's legs, causing her to stumble, nearly falling. In the middle of the crowded lobby, Isabella declared, "People like you are only good for ruining guests' belongings." And the woman, Margaret, after a moment of imbalance, straightened up. She didn't talk back, didn't offer another excuse. She just looked directly at Isabella. But in that brief moment, her eyes flashed with a profound disappointment, a look that went far beyond anger or hurt. Then she quietly turned, blended into the staff corridor, and disappeared. Isabella lifted her chin, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She believed she had just won, had asserted her undeniable status in front of the entire hotel lobby. But that smile vanished when a gentle hand touched her shoulder. "Isabella, what in the world did you just do?" It was Olivia, Isabella's best friend. She had been standing in a corner and had witnessed the entire incident. Her face was a mask of disbelief and disappointment. "What do you mean? What did I do?" Isabella brushed her friend's hand away, her voice still laced with indignation. "I was teaching her a lesson about being careful. You see, everything needs to have standards." "Standards?" Olivia lowered her voice, pulling her friend to a more secluded corner, away from the remaining curious eyes. "You humiliated a woman old enough to be your mother in the middle of the main lobby. You made her nearly fall, all for a scratch I had to squint to even see. That's not standards, Isa. That's cruelty." Isabella crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You don't get it. If I'm not tough, they'll walk all over me. Have you forgotten what happened with Daniel? Weakness gets you nothing but disrespect." Olivia's gaze softened slightly at the mention of the name, but her resolve didn't waver. She took Isabella's hand, looking her straight in the eye. "I haven't forgotten, but taking it out on innocent people doesn't make you stronger. Listen to me, Isabella." Her voice became earnest and urgent. "True elegance comes from how you behave, not the clothes you wear or the five-star hotel you're in." Isabella snatched her hand back, a furious gesture as if Olivia's words had burned her. "You're so naive, Olivia. Politeness doesn't get you respect. Power does." With that, she turned her back and strode towards the golden elevators, leaving Olivia standing alone in the lobby. Olivia stood frozen, watching her friend's proud silhouette disappear. She sighed, a heavy breath filled with helplessness and worry. She wondered what Alexander, Isabella's fiancé, would think if he had witnessed that scene. As the gilded elevator doors slid shut, the sudden silence summoned a ghost from her past. Olivia's words were like a needle piercing an old scar. Isabella had always tried to hide a scar named Daniel. It hadn't been a loud breakup. It had been worse. Daniel, her ex-boyfriend, had quietly left her in the middle of a trip after she had insulted his family, a family of grape farmers she had always secretly looked down on. The issue wasn't just a single word or action, but the deep-rooted contempt in her character, what Daniel had called the emptiness behind the glamorous facade. For Isabella, the greatest pain wasn't losing love, but the utter humiliation of being judged and abandoned by the very people she considered beneath her. The feeling of being looked down upon by country folk had become an obsession. From that moment, a toxic belief took root in her mind. She wasn't abandoned because she was cruel, but because she wasn't powerful enough. She believed that if she had been wealthier, her status higher, Daniel would never have dared to leave. He and his entire family would have had to fear her, to bow to her. In her eyes, kindness became a weakness, and decency was for losers. The memory of Daniel didn't teach her a lesson in empathy. It reinforced her conviction that power and wealth were the only true shields. They were her weapons to ensure that no one ever again could look down on her and leave her so easily. As night fell, the private beach of the Riviera resort transformed into a magical stage. Tiki torches flickered, and thousands of string lights woven through the palm trees sparkled like a canopy of artificial stars. At the best table, right by the water's edge, Alexander smiled at Isabella, his hand gently squeezing hers on the crisp white tablecloth. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" he said, his voice full of pride. "My mother personally oversaw everything to make sure this party was special." Isabella took a sip of wine, her smile radiant under the lights. "It's perfect. Your mother has impeccable taste. Everything is in its proper place," she said, emphasizing the last few words. Her wine glass was nearly empty. She scanned the area for a waiter. Just then, an elderly woman in a crisp, white uniform quietly approached their table. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, and her reading glasses gave her face a somewhat stern look. It was, of course, Margaret. "Ma'am, would you care for more wine?" Margaret asked, her voice even and professional. Isabella didn't look at her, simply extending her glass. "You should have asked me that 5 minutes ago," she said, her voice cold and low enough that only those at the table could hear. Margaret showed no reaction. She just quietly took the glass and headed towards the bar. Alexander didn't seem to notice the small exchange. He was looking toward another group of guests. "Oh, there's Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," he said to Isabella. "I should go over and say hello for a moment. You'll be all right here?" "Of course, darling," Isabella smiled sweetly. "Don't keep me waiting too long." Alexander gave her a light kiss on the cheek, then stood up and walked away. The moment his silhouette disappeared behind a palm tree, the smile on Isabella's face vanished. She sat up straight, her regal poise and sweet patience vanishing with him. She looked down at the empty plate before her, where the appetizer had been cleared 10 minutes ago. She began tapping her long, slender fingers on the table, the rhythm growing faster and faster, a clear sign of her rising impatience. Her eyes scanned the servers moving across the sand, and then she saw Margaret. She was carefully pouring water for an older couple at a nearby table, her movements deliberate, perhaps even a bit slow. To Isabella, this wasn't carefulness, it was sluggishness. In her eyes, Margaret wasn't a respectable woman, but a faulty cog in a perfect machine, and she, the queen of the party, would never tolerate an imperfect machine. Isabella's patience was wearing as thin as a thread. 5 minutes passed, then 7. She watched as plates of fragrant beef Wellington were delivered to the tables around her, but hers remained empty. The feeling of being overlooked began to simmer inside her, hot and unpleasant. She saw Margaret walking towards her, but her hands were empty. That was the final straw. Isabella didn't call out. She snapped her fingers. A sharp, arrogant snap echoed in the elegant space. Margaret stopped short, then quickened her pace to the table. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" she asked, her voice still calm. "Help me," Isabella scoffed, a humorless smile on her face. "Perhaps by bringing out the main course before this party is over, or did you think I came here to admire the ocean? The dish is being prepared. It will be out in just a few more minutes. The kitchen is a bit overwhelmed at the moment," Margaret explained patiently. "A few more minutes," Isabella repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. To her, that wasn't an explanation, it was a challenge. Clang! A jarring sound echoed as Isabella slammed her knife and fork down onto the porcelain plate. The saxophone fell silent. Conversations at the surrounding tables abruptly stopped. Every head turned in her direction. Sensing she had the room's attention, Isabella raised her voice, each word a dagger stabbing into the party's peaceful atmosphere. "Is this supposed to be a 5-star dinner or some roadside diner?" The air grew thick. Margaret stood frozen before the table, the target of this public humiliation. But Isabella wasn't finished. A malicious glint flashed in her eyes as she spotted the glass of water on the table. With a swift, deliberate motion, she grabbed the glass and threw its contents directly at Margaret. Water splashed everywhere. The entire front of Margaret's crisp, white uniform was soaked, clinging to her frame. A few cold droplets clung to the rim of her glasses. A collective gasp of shock rippled through the surrounding tables. Margaret stood motionless, water still dripping from her apron onto the sand. She didn't wipe her face, didn't step back. She just looked at Isabella. "Perhaps this will sober you up a bit," Isabella said, her voice now a low, contemptuous whisper. She let out a breath, feeling a surge of triumphant power course through her. She believed she had restored order, had taught the slow-moving subordinate an unforgettable lesson. But then a voice came from right behind her. It wasn't loud, but it was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, shattering her satisfaction in an instant. "What are you doing, Isabella?" She spun around. Alexander was standing there. No one knew when he had returned, but his eyes made it clear. He had seen everything. His face, which was always so warm when he looked at her, was now a cold, distant mask. "Alexander," Isabella was flustered for a moment but quickly regained her arrogant composure. "When did you get back?" I was just trying to maintain service standards. She was being incredibly slow and—" "Enough," Alexander cut her off, not even looking at her. His gaze was fixed on Margaret, and in it was an unconcealed apology and respect. He gave Margaret a slight nod, a silent apology on Isabella's behalf. Then he turned back, his steel-grey eyes locking onto Isabella's. His voice wasn't a reprimand, it was a verdict. "Isabella, you've just humiliated yourself more than anyone else here." The words hit her like a phantom slap, more painful than 1,000 shouts. Isabella was speechless, the triumphant smile on her lips freezing, then crumbling. As the tense confrontation unfolded, at a nearby table, a young female tourist quietly lowered her phone. She had started recording the moment Isabella slammed her cutlery down. The entire tirade and the act of throwing the water had been captured in crystal-clear detail. Her fingers flew across the screen. A few seconds later, in a group chat named Riviera Holidaymakers, a 30-second video appeared with the caption, "Can't believe the behavior of this guest at the VIP table." From that private group chat, all it took was one share. Someone posted the clip to their Instagram story with a sarcastic title, "Princess and the Pauper at the Riviera Resort." The clip went viral at lightning speed. In less than half an hour, it was all over social media with even more sensationalized headlines, "Riviera's Queen of the Night" or "Nightmare Guest." A firestorm of critical and outraged comments began to explode. Isabella, still reeling from Alexander's reaction, was completely unaware that her fleeting act of cruelty was no longer a private matter. It had become undeniable evidence, transforming her from an admirable fiancée into the epicenter of a social media firestorm. "Alexander, you don't understand," she said, turning on Margaret, her eyes flashing with renewed anger as she looked for someone to blame. "It was her. She was deliberately provoking me. Where is the manager? I want him to fire this server immediately." Alexander started to say something, but a gentle hand on his arm stopped him. It was Margaret. She was still standing there in her soaked uniform, yet she looked nothing like a victim. She calmly took off her reading glasses, wiped away the lingering droplets, and tucked them into her pocket. When she looked up, her eyes, no longer hidden, were sharp and authoritative, the very same eyes as Alexander. She took a step forward, her voice not loud but clear and poised, echoing in the party's stunned silence. "You won't need to have me fired, Isabella." Isabella froze, confused by the employee's strange demeanor. Margaret looked directly into her eyes, and for a moment, Isabella felt as if she were being seen right through to her very soul. Then, the older woman spoke, introducing herself to the entire party, who were all holding their breath. "I am Margaret Grant, Alexander's mother." It felt like an explosion went off inside Isabella's head. Impossible. A joke. A terrible mistake. The color drained from her face, leaving it as white as a sheet. Margaret continued, her voice calm, but each word was like a hammer blow to Isabella's pride. "I disguised myself as an employee to see how my son's fiancée treats the people she looks down on." A profound silence fell over the beach, broken only by the sound of the waves. Then, like a domino effect, whispers and shocked gasps began to ripple from table to table. All eyes turned to Isabella, no longer with curiosity, but with a mixture of shock, pity, and contempt. The woman she had just publicly humiliated, the person she had called a lesser, was in fact the most powerful person there, the woman who was to become her mother-in-law. The game Isabella thought she was winning turned out to be a test, and she had failed spectacularly. All sound seemed to recede, leaving only a dull ringing in Isabella's ears. Alexander's mother. The words repeated over and over, crushing every ounce of her pride. The woman she had just insulted, the woman she had mercilessly thrown water on, now held her entire future in the palm of her hand. Margaret took another step towards Isabella, her gaze no longer that of a server, but of a mother, a matriarch. She didn't raise her voice, but her words carried the weight of stone, resonating through the space. A person can stay in the most luxurious hotel, wear the most expensive clothes, she said, her eyes sweeping over Isabella's vibrant red dress. But true nobility lies in how they treat the simplest waiter. That statement was like a final verdict. The strength seemed to drain from Isabella's body. Her armor of power and arrogance shattered completely. She looked at Alexander and saw only cold disappointment in his eyes. She looked at the guests around them and saw their pity and scorn. Her world was collapsing. "Mother," a choked sob escaped her throat. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I truly had no idea it was you." Tears began to stream down her face, mixing with her expensive makeup. She collapsed onto the soft sand, reaching out as if to grab hold of Margaret in a desperate, pathetic gesture. "Please forgive me, please." Margaret looked down at the weeping girl at her feet, but her expression didn't soften. She didn't step forward to help her up. She just gave a slow, sorrowful shake of her head. "You're not in pain because you humiliated a server," Margaret replied, her voice devoid of anger, stating a cold, obvious fact. "You're in pain because you discovered that server was Alexander's mother." That final sentence was like a fatal blow, stripping away the pretense of Isabella's remorse. It exposed a brutal truth. She wasn't crying over her wrongdoing. She was crying over the consequences she was about to face. The party was dead. No announcement was needed. The atmosphere said it all. Alexander didn't say another word to Isabella. He just gave a curt nod to the flustered hotel manager, who had rushed over, a nod that signaled everything was over. He bent down, took Isabella's arm, and pulled her to her feet. His grip held no tenderness, only a cold, detached efficiency, as if he were handling a broken object. "Come with me," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. They walked in silence, leaving the ruined beach behind. All eyes followed them, eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. Isabella kept her head down, for the first time in her life feeling so ashamed she wished she could just disappear into thin air. Every step on the soft sand felt like walking on hot coals. They entered the elevator, walked down the hall, and into the presidential suite. Click. The sound of the door closing was like a gunshot, sealing them in a suffocating, tense space. Alexander released her arm. He didn't look at her, just walked silently to the large window and stared out at the dark, inky sea. His silhouette was straight and strong, yet incredibly distant. His silence was more terrifying than any rage. Isabella stood trembling in the middle of the room. Her armor of arrogance was completely gone, leaving only raw fear. She knew she was on the verge of losing everything. "Alexander," she began, her voice hoarse and shaky. Will you just listen to me? I really didn't mean to." He remained silent, his back to her. His silence was suffocating her. Panicked, she moved towards him, and then, with no pride left, she sank to her knees on the cold floor. Her hands clutched at the hem of his pants in a desperate, debased plea. "I'm begging you," she cried, tears streaming freely now. "I know I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please just give me a chance, just one last chance. I'll change, I promise. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't leave me. Don't be silent like this." She looked up, her tear-streaked face pleading. "I'll apologize to your mother. I'll get on my knees and apologize to her in front of everyone. I'll do anything to fix this. I love you, Alexander, please." Finally, Alexander turned slowly and looked down at the woman kneeling at his feet, but there was no pity in his eyes, only a deep, profound sadness and an endless exhaustion. Just then, the door to the suite creaked open. Margaret entered, followed by Olivia. She had changed out of her soaked uniform and was now wearing a simple but elegant evening gown. Olivia lingered behind her, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and helplessness as she looked at her best friend kneeling on the floor. Isabella looked up and saw them, and the last shred of hope inside her disintegrated. She knew this was her sentencing. Margaret looked at Isabella, then turned to Alexander, her son, who was facing a decision that weighed more heavily than his entire career. Forgiveness, Margaret began, her voice quiet but heavy with meaning, is meaningless without true internal change. She moved closer to her son and placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze both stern and full of love. You must remember, Alexander, the woman you choose as your wife is the same woman who will raise your children. Her character will be the foundation for the next generation of Grants. That statement was a final wake-up call, not just for Alexander, but also a dagger straight to Isabella's heart. She suddenly understood that the problem had never been a scratched suitcase or a delayed meal. The problem was the very essence of her character. The room fell silent, the only sounds being Isabella's choked sobs and the gentle murmur of the ocean waves outside. Alexander closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. He gently removed Isabella's hand from his leg and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the sea breeze wash over his tense face. He stared out at the night sea, where the white-crested waves crashed onto the shore and receded in an endless cycle. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice hoarse and weary, without turning around. "Mother, what should I do?" Margaret didn't join him on the balcony. She simply stood in the doorway, watching the strong yet lonely silhouette of her son. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Choose the path that brings peace to our family." She didn't tell him which path was right. She only gave him a compass. Alexander remained there, gazing pensively into the vast darkness of the ocean. A spilled glass of water could be wiped away, an apology could be spoken, but could the fractures in trust and the profound disappointment ever truly be mended? Would he choose forgiveness and hope for a change that might never come, or would he choose a painful ending to secure a peaceful future? His answer remained suspended in the air, mingling with the sound of the waves below.